Hello and welcome to another episode of Kitchen Sink Dharma. And today's episode is all about living simply, and it's also about identifying what's standing in the way of peace and freedom for us. So the advice that the Buddha gave to his followers was to go into the forest and sit under a tree. And the reason that he told them to do this was to encourage them to get away from noise and activity. And it was recognized then that people need some peace, they need some stillness sometimes. It can be very hard to wake up when you're in the midst of everything. And back then, just like now, the world felt quite unstable. So at the time there were rival kingdoms, there was movement of population, sometimes there were wars, but always there was change, there was constant change. So it's easy to think that the times that we're living in now are uniquely challenging. But really the world's always been like this. The Buddha and his followers didn't live during a peaceful, stable time. Now I'm recording this in January 2025, and the world feels to me as if it's as volatile as ever. And I think we need our equivalent of going into the forest and sitting under a tree. Waking and growing up and learning means making space, giving ourselves some space, maybe finding somewhere safe and quiet in our own lives to be able to explore and investigate. So we need some stability from which to practice. As I said, maybe some sense of safety. And although the degree to which we need that might vary from person to person, this is very much how our training works. There's some degree of safety and then some challenge. Now I happen to think that there's quite a lot to be grateful for living in the time and place that we do, but there are obviously aspects of our world that really are not good for us. And part of what brought me to this path is the feeling that there was more to life than this. Maybe something was missing, something important. And part of what was missing was space to explore and grow. And of course, many traditions across different cultures have recognized the significance of sacred spaces. So in other words, spaces in which we can sit in silence. And there's an understanding that we need some kind of vessel, some kind of holding field, if you like. And in the Insight tradition, which is the one in which I practice, we're encouraged to create a space in our home where we won't be disturbed, at least for some time during the day. And that this is something we can offer ourselves. It's a place where we can still the mind, tune into our experience. And if we put aside some time every day and allow some space for practice, this can be very beneficial. And there's also an understanding that we will take care of our own hearts and minds. So the Buddha actually saw the human mind as having great potential for freedom. And his notion of mind was that it's something very precious, but it's also something impulsive, something quite capricious sometimes. So it's capable of great intuition. It's also very much in need of training. It's naturally quite unruly. And we talk about the monkey mind, which is capable of great leaps and beautiful moves, but it's in need of harnessing. So our full potential lies hidden. And there's an interesting teaching in the Digha Nikaya called the Sigalovada Sutta. And it's one of the teachings that's aimed at ordinary householders, so not monastics, not monks and nuns, but just ordinary people who have work and families and so on. And the Buddha gives advice to somebody called Sigalika, and it includes advice against drinking alcohol, against roaming the streets at night, frequenting festivals, gambling, having unhelpful friends, and laziness and things like that. So you can see this advice as being very much of its time, maybe historically interesting. Maybe some of the reasons given for avoiding certain behaviors might not apply anymore. And I think, for example, frequenting festivals doesn't seem to be my biggest problem. But I do think there's a bigger lesson in the sutta that applies equally today, which is that the choices that we make have a big impact on our practice and on our lives. And those choices include how we decide to spend our time, and who we spend it with, and where we direct our attention. And that includes, of course, how we use the internet, how much of our lives are caught up in dramas, and what kind of a sacred space we can create for ourselves. And we're taught that one aspect of the training that's really important is intention, and that includes finding out what's unhelpful in our day-to-day life. So, for example, addictive patterns and habits of distraction, knowing our impulses, knowing our compulsions, and being able to work with them, being willing to work with them. So by cultivating right intention, we meet reality, we find out what's standing in our way. This took me quite a long time to work out. It seems very obvious to me now. But if we make unskillful choices, it's going to be much harder for us to remain present, to remain focused and balanced. We just end up living in a cloud of agitation. And in this tradition, it's understood that you let go of craving and clinging because you understand that it's more painful. It's not because you're told to or you have to. It's because you work out that it's actually not helping you. And there are conditions that we can put in place quite consciously and deliberately that support calm and collectedness and spaciousness and kindness and contentment. Equally, there are conditions that support feelings of agitation or guilt or separateness or resentment. And of course, one of these conditions is our media consumption. And to me, this is maybe the modern equivalent of roaming the streets at night or frequenting festivals or all those things that people were advised not to do. Because one of the problems I think we face now is just too much news. I think it's possible to become addicted to anger and outrage as a result of our consumption of very sensationalist news media. We can become addicted to content that makes us angry and fearful. And it's so compelling, even though it makes us unhappy, it's so compelling. And there's a reason for this. So fear and anger arise from the more primitive part of the brain, and they cause us to act first and think later. And anger in particular triggers the release of dopamine, which is a hormone connected to the brain's reward and pleasure centers. So that's why anger can be particularly addictive. And I think we need to understand this in order to navigate the modern world. Because sometimes if we're stressed or we're fed up, we actually don't choose to do what's going to help us. Instead we watch too much TV, we stay up late, we doom scroll. There's so many distractions available for us. And this is where community can be so helpful. So there's a term that comes up a lot in the early scriptures, which is kalyana mitata. And it's often translated as noble friendship, or sometimes spiritual friendship. And this kind of friendship is really important, and it simply describes connections with other people based on the recognition of mutual values, and actually bringing some care and bringing some support to that connection. It's actually quite helpful to ask yourself who your noble friends are, who you can be a noble friend to, because connecting with the goodness in others strengthens and affirms the goodness in ourselves. It fosters our inner growth. So I would invite you to reflect on this, on whether anybody or anything is hijacking your attention on a regular basis. And if they are, what's that doing to you? Can you actually choose who you're going to spend time with or where your attention is going to go in a way that helps you? Can you allow enough simplicity and peace into your life to be able to practice? And then if not, what's standing in your way? Because this is very much about how we choose to live. If we can't just go to the forest and sit under a tree like they did at the time of the Buddha, what else can we do? I think it's really important to remind ourselves that this is a training, and it's a training that doesn't require us to get it right all the time. So if you feel you're not living up to your wishes, your aspirations, it helps to view where you're at with some kindness, with some patience. So it's about getting in touch with what's going on for you in your life, but not trying to force change through willpower. When we try and force ourselves to change through willpower alone, it doesn't work very well. The mind doesn't react well to being bossed around. There's something I sometimes find quite challenging about early Buddhism. There seems to be an assumption that progress is always steady, and it's suggested that you start your practice and then over time everything else falls into place. And I don't know whether it's just that things were different back then, but I think for a lot of us now, it's not quite like that. I think there's times when we're full of vigor and enthusiasm, and then there are times when it's like trying to walk through treacle, or we take steps forward and then sometimes it feels like we're going backwards. And there have certainly been times for me when practice has not come very easily. And I think I'm much more accepting of that now than I used to be, because I think now I know I can always come back. So the forgetfulness isn't a failing. I think it's just what happens. And I think our intentions can always bring us back. So for me, it's much more useful to understand ourselves than it is to judge ourselves, to accept what's happening right now is just what's happening, rather than to berate ourselves for not being a good enough meditator. And then we can get back in the saddle. We can keep going and try again. And I want to finish with a brief poem. It's a translation of something by Epictetus called Care Take This Moment. And it goes, care take this moment. Immerse yourself in its particulars. Respond to this person, this challenge, this deed. Quit the evasions. Stop giving yourself needless trouble. It is time to really live, to fully inhabit the situation you happen to be in now. You are not some disinterested bystander. Exert yourself. When your doors are shut and your room is dark, you are not alone. The will of nature is within you, as your natural genius is within. Listen to its importunings. Follow its directives. As concerns the art of living, the material is your own life. No great thing is created suddenly. There must be time. Give your best and always be kind. So that's from Epictetus. And thank you for listening. Hope you can join me again next time.